benefits of intermittent fasting. Hello wellness devotees. In today's video, we will explore the astounding clinical advantages of intermittent fasting. You have come to the correct site. If you have ever been curious about intermittent fasting and how it might improve your health, now that you have your notepad, let's explore the fascinating world of intermittent fasting together. Fasting. If you are wondering what is intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting. So let me tell you, it's a time-restricted feeding pattern. When you have a time where you don't eat and you have a time where you eat, there is an alteration between feeding and a fasting window. There are different ways by which intermittent fasting can be performed, and the most popular ones are 6 intermittent fasting, where you fast intermittent fasting for hours and feed for 6-hour time window, and the next is alternate day fasting. Alternate day fasting, where you switch between a feeding and a fasting day and keep it up for the rest of the week. Now, all of these paradigms have their own benefits and pros in a different video. I'll be discussing that anyway. You can check out my basic video on intermittent fasting by clicking on the link given. In this video, we will focus on the clinical benefits of intermittent fasting. We will talk about how intermittent fasting is helping to reduce weight. It can be beneficial for increasing the lifespan. We would also talk about how intermittent fasting can be good for our cardiac health. Later on, we will talk about how it helps in stress resistance and how it helps us to improve our cognition ability. Lastly, how it helps in disease management like diabetes management. All these clinical benefits are based on the review article published in New England Journal of Medicine, where Professor Mark P. Matheson summarizes all these benefits. He is from Johns Hopkins University, so don't forget to check out this article, which is provided in the description. Let's start with how intermittent fasting helps with weight loss and improves cardiac health. So these days, obesity is a big problem. Our sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise, work-life stress, and food with refined sugar and eating too much processed food can lead to these obesity-related problems. And obesity comes with the cost of dyslipidemia, or a high risk of cardiac diseases. So intermittent fasting can be really beneficial. Let me tell you how intermittent fasting is now proven to reduce weight and helps in obesity management. There are clinical studies which suggest intermittent fasting can also improve the lipid profile if it is followed properly. Imagine you are fasting under these circumstances. If your body needs energy, it has to act on the energy reserves. Intermittent fasting induces our body to utilize triglyceride storage. So in our body, in the adipose cells, there is triglyceride which works like an energy reserve during fasting. Triglyceride would be broken down into fatty acid, which is transferred into the liver, and the liver utilizes fatty acids and oxidizes them to generate ATP, which is the energy. So, in order to generate energy and keep our body functional, fat reserves are utilized. So, obviously, the result is fat depletion, and we would be seeing that our fat reserves are gone. So, weight loss is prominent. Next thing is how intermittent fasting can be beneficial for increasing the lifespan. Now, preclinical studies in rats have shown that if the rats are in a diet form where they undergo alternate day feeding, that means alternate day fasting paradigm, then their overall survival percentage increases several fold. Similar evidence comes from macaques. So if you feed these macaques with some kind of caloric restriction paradigm, or 5:2 intermediate fasting or alternate fasting, it turns out their lifespan has increased. So exactly how lifespan has increased by intermediate fasting is still a topic of debate and intense research, but the outcome is pretty amazing. Now, question is whether these kinds of preclinical studies are at all valid for humans. Now, it turns out if we look at several tribal populations such as Okinawa, in Sentinels in the Okinawa Island Munza tribe in Pakistan and another tribe in the Andes Mountain, we will find some striking results. All of these tribes have an average lifespan greater than years, and one of the rituals common in all of these tribes is fasting and intense exercise. That in turn tells us that the preclinical data that we obtain from mice or rodents might be true in humans as well. Now, Human clinical trials are underway, and this is an important aspect of understanding how intermittent fasting can help us with the healthy aging. Now, one study suggests that there are several types of intermediate fasting which has different outcomes. For example, a group of 100 women who were all obese or overweight was put on a diet of intermittent fasting for a 6-month period. In one group, they followed 5 is to do intermittent fasting, and in one group followed daily caloric restriction. It turns out that both of these groups showed a reduction in weight. They have shown significant weight loss and a decrease in waist circumference, but the group that has undergone 5 is to 2 intermittent fasting shows a higher insulin sensitivity. Also, they have retained lean mass while reducing weight, so that's pretty amazing. There are many other clinical trials which shows intermittent fasting is quite beneficial, so all these links would be provided in the description. Now, next up is how intermittent fasting can be beneficial for our cognition and the functioning of our brain. It turns out intermittent fasting can help you to work better, focus better, and think better. That might be pretty confusing to you, right? But hear me out. So, there are recent studies that shows that intermittent fasting helps in memory consolidation and has improved cognitive aspects. So, how does that happen? Think about when we are evolving. So, our food availability was a kind of a minimal someday or ancestors get food and someday they have no food. They have to hunt, right? In this process, they have to be really focused while hunting. Otherwise, they could be also prey instead of a predator. So it turns out fasting has created some kind of advantages in them, such that they can focus better in terms of the collection of food, and that's how we evolved so far. Now, what really happens during fasting that helps our cognitive benefit? When we are fasting, there are certain products that are generated in the liver, known as ketone bodies, such as acetoacetate, acetone, beta-hydroxybutyrate. Many of these ketone bodies has effects on our brain, and these effects are neuromodulatory. Let me break it down for you. Ketone bodies are like a reserve fuel. So when we fast in the intermittent fasting paradigm, our brain runs with these ketone bodies, but when we are feeding, our brain utilizes glucose for energy production. So there is a ketogenic to glucogenic switch in these intermittent fasting paradigms. This metabolic switch is really beneficial while we are on a keto, then beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is generated at libitum while we are fasting. Let's say we are fasting for 4 hours, beta-hydroxybutyrate levels would go up. So beta-hydroxybutyrate can increase one neurotropic factor known as BDNF. BDNF is shown to be very beneficial for the brain. It helps to create new neuronal connections. It also helps in neurogenesis, which means we are making improved connections and making more neurons in our brain. And that kind of explains how intermittent fasting can help our cognitive abilities. Moreover, we know right now that our neuronal circuits need to have a steady state firing rate, and increase in steady state firing rate or decrease in steady state firing rate could be detrimental to us, and an activity sensor might sense this excitability, and whenever excitability goes beyond or below a steady state level, it can readjust the steady state firing rate, and it turns out these ketone bodies can be one of these metabolic sensors. Ketone bodies modulate neuronal function modulation. Recent research shows that beta-hydroxybutyrate can inhibit glutamatergic signaling, which is a neurotransmitter signaling responsible for excitability in the nervous system. It turns out beta-hydroxybutyrate positively regulates KCNQ potassium channel, which leads to reduction of neuronal activity. So overall, modulation of the neuronal activity is mediated by the ketone bodies, which are produced during intermittent fasting or a prolonged time of fasting. Now, this evidence is not really new. Actually, these evidences are found in Greek mythology, so epileptic seizures are one of kind. Epileptic seizures were thought of as demonic possession, manifestation of electrical disparity in the brain. Epilepsy is a severe disease these days, and it was there in ancient Greece as well. Ancient Greek people thought of epilepsy was a demonic possession. So, in order to recover them, they kind of locked them inside a holy temple, and it turns out after a few days, when this particular individual comes out, he is kind of normal. Now, we understand when he was locked in this shrine, he was fasting, and fasting leads to several ketone bodies, which might have given a kind of benefits in these epileptic and controllable excitability. This is how overall ketone body generation during intermittent fasting is super beneficial for our brain. Now let's talk about how intermittent fasting can help us to deal with stress more efficiently. It turns out that when we give our body stress by doing exercise, we generate a little bit amount of ROS. Or when we fast, we also give our body some amount of stress. So this stress allows our body to recycle things better. Prolonged fasting induces autophagy. Let me explain to you how prolonged fasting induces a particular cellular process known as autophagy. In autophagy, cellular organelles and proteins that are non-functional get recycled, and all the raw materials are utilized to build up new organelles or new proteins. So this recycling procedure or renovation procedure really helps our body to cope with stress. Let's say we need a functional enzyme under a stressful situation. In order to make this enzyme, we need the raw materials, which are the amino acids and peptides. All of these can come from our diet, but during fasting, we don't have a dietary input of these amino acids. Then how does our body cope with this stress, and how does our body make these functional enzymes? Then our body focuses more on recycling methods. Body upregulates the methodology of autophagy, which means it kind of looks for non-functional protein and recycle them to take the spare parts and build up functional protein. In this process, not only the body is generating functional protein, which is important to fight stress, but also it is recycling all the faulty and garbage protein, and this is kind of like a molecular garbage clearing mechanism. This is how our body fights. If you don't understand this integrated details of molecular biology, then let me tell you in a simpler example. Let's say you have a house, and in your locality there is severe rain and storms all the time, so obviously your house gets a minute damage every time it rains, and you have a nice damage repairing system. You always call the mechanics to repair the damage into your house. So obviously renovation happens very frequently in your area, so you are now better prepared for severe disasters like a tornado or hurricane. So next time there is damage, you can efficiently recover or efficiently renovate your house because you are trained to do so. Similarly, when we train our body with a small amount of stress every day, then our body learns how to cope with stress more efficiently. And that's what happens during intermittent fasting. So we evolved so far, but there was a big problem with our evolution. Our lifestyle has become more sedentary, and we consume excess amounts of calories because we have a lot of money to buy food. Right now, we don't have to hunt for food. Now, with a combination of excess food and a sedentary lifestyle, we are obese as a global population, and this comes with the cost of dysregulated lipid profile, increased triglyceride, and overall increased risk of cardiac failure. Now, let's talk about how intermittent fasting could be good for diabetes control. So in case of intermittent fasting, it has been shown that cells upregulate the glucose transporters and thereby allowing glucose to enter the cell. So this is how intermittent fasting could be pretty beneficial for diabetes management, where the glucose is actually trapped in the blood circulation and not able to enter any cell types. And that concludes our in-depth examination of the clinical advantages of intermittent fasting. I wish you had as much insight as I did after reading this. If you liked the video, please remember to thumbs up and share it with your friends, and subscribe to Nutro Plus so you can see more thought-provoking debates about health and well-being. Please feel free to comment below with your ideas and inquiries. Do not forget that intermittent fasting is just one of many little changes you can make to become healthier. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the future video.